My name is Tory Blackwell. I am a science instructor over at Clackamas Community College. I've been in education now for about 6 years. I spent the first probably 12 years of my adult life in basic research, kind of at the bench doing standard science, worked in a lot of different model organisms out here for. One of the things that I did alongside with all of my research work was a lot of outreach, primarily at the K through 8 and eventually high school level, talking with kids about science, helping them with science fair projects, helping teachers teach science to K through 8 level students. And a couple of things that I saw really made me afraid. For one thing, the number of students that I would run into and ask them about science, and they would tell me that science is scary, science is hard, science is not for everybody, you can't do science, I can't do science. That got me a little bit worried. And then I ran into teachers that said, science is hard, science is scary, it's the part of 5th grade that I hate to teach because it's so hard and scary. And that's a great way to reduce the number of people that decide to go into science. If your teacher's telling you that it's really hard and scary, but we're going to try to do a science fair project together, that's kind of some bad signaling. So I decided to make the shift to education primarily because I wanted to try to break that cycle and increase the number of students that no longer see science as scary, hard, or impossible for me to do. And then as being someone that's from a diverse background, when I was in graduate school, we had some wonderful jokes about the number of African American males you would see in the building. So I wanted to make sure that that stopped. So I'd like to see more people with different backgrounds in science, and just in general, people not having that fear of what science is. That also kind of got me into the Build EXITO program, because it's really kind of what this program is all about, generating a whole new group of people that can go out and maybe one day replace me. Biology is awesome. I often talk about replacement value. I need 2 of you to replace me, so that we can have one more and we can keep going. Right? So that's a little bit about me, and I like it because if my timing is right, that was probably about 1.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes. I might have ran a little bit long, but that's essentially an elevator pitch, right? I told you who I am. I told you what I care about, why I care about it, hopefully with enough passion and interest that maybe made you realize that I really do care about it. And then I told you why it's important that other people should care about it, because otherwise science might go away. You don't want that to happen, especially if you want to keep using yourself. So, what is an elevator pitch? For our purposes, it's about a 1-minute explanation of what your research interests are. Right? What is it that makes you, what got you into thinking about this program? Right? What are those things? Hopefully it's just one thing. For some people it's a little bit broader. For some people it's laser focused. We'll talk about that as we make our way through the presentation. The experience part, we'll talk a little bit about that too. There are some really beautiful things that happen with that experience part, but there are also some things that I like people to kind of keep in mind as they're thinking about the experience. How do you share your elevator pitch? When do you share your elevator pitch? How many of you enjoy public speaking? You just love public speaking. No problems, you can do it. Okay. How many of you don't really enjoy public speaking? You will do it if you're forced to do it. Yeah, I'm up here publicly speaking and I have my hand up. Right? I like elevator pitches because they get to serve a lot of different functions. For one, it makes for a great icebreaker. So if you ever wonder, like, what am I going to say? I really want to talk to that person over there, but what can I say? And you're at a conference like this, or you're at some other scientific conference. Your elevator pitch becomes your back pocket conversation starter. You can just walk up and say, hi, I'm Tory Blackwell. I got into education because, and you can break that ice and have that natural flowing conversation, hopefully. Sometimes people stay shy, but there's that component. When you're talking with other people in our groups, other scholars for the those elevator pitches become useful because it lets one scholar kind of understand what you're interested in and maybe start making some connections. You will hear a lot about networking over the next 3 or 4 days. Right? That's one of those ways to develop those networks. Finding people that have similar interests and passions as what you have. You can put a group of people together with similar interests that are all passionate about those research interests and do a lot of great things. I used to always think science was about gathering up all your things and then going into a little cave and then doing some work and then you come out and like hold up a sign that says, I found out 75%. And then you go back into your little cave and you do some more work. That's not really science. It isn't. I mean, science is probably humanity's greatest, most far-reaching, interdisciplinary, interpersonal, connected thing that we do on the planet. Right? It crosses city lines, county lines, state lines, country lines, continental lines. Right? And it's really hard to do science all on your own. Right? It's impossible. Most of us are just standing on the shoulders of other people and trying to look a little bit farther. So it's hard to stand on somebody else's shoulders when there's no shoulders. So, other times that you might use them, conferences, presentations. It says on an actual elevator ride. If you live in the town like Oregon City, where I'm at, our elevators are about 5 seconds. We have mostly 2-story buildings. It's not really that useful. But if you go to, I don't know, a big conference in Chicago, so you decide to go to Society for Neuroscience conference, they have these buildings with long elevator rides. Now you have something to talk about in the elevator. They're useful at those conferences because, again, just like you can network with your peers here, you can network with other researchers by sharing that elevator pitch. And one of the things that we'll talk about is kind of that experience and that authenticity component. Because I can tell you right now, if I'm listening to somebody's elevator pitch and their pitch is, I'm really interested in dogs, because dogs are cool, and I hear they help people recover from disorders and diseases and stuff, so it'd be great if we had more dogs. Like, wow, you love that project. Were you like punished? Is that how you got dogs? What happened? But if the same person comes up to me and says, wow, do you know how useful animals are in helping people recover from traumatic injuries? Amazingly useful. And then you start to give me all the different statistics and studies that people have done to show how important it is to have this connection with some other thing. Then I'm like, wow, you really love this. Whoa, how can I help you? What should we do? In fact, I know some people. Maybe I should get you with them because then you won't freak out in front of me because you have so much energy for this. This is, right? So having that passion, that authenticity from your experience can often help with developing that elevator pitch. It can also kind of counteract some nervousness, because sometimes when people are nervous, they don't want to say anything. But if you're a little bit nervous, but also a little bit passionate, maybe you might be a little bit more balancing and energetic with your presentations and your pitches. What else? So these are kind of oral components of the elevator pitch. I also like to take a step back and look a little bit more broadly, because one of the things that you will learn to do over the years, and I won't lie to you, many of us didn't learn about these things until we were well past where many of you are. Being concise in science is kind of important. And being able to make that initial concise draw to your work for another person reading about your work is also important. Have you guys heard the word grant pop up in the last 2 days? I see some people nodding heads. Carlos and Thomas they said they wrote a grant. They didn't show you how big the grant was. Many of us don't bring the grant with us because it's really big. It's a lot of writing. The way those grants occur is somebody sits down and they write about, hey, here is a research interest. It's really important. It's critical that we try to address this thing. Here's how we hope to address it. Oh, and by the way, please give us $20 or $30 million over the next 3 to 5 years. Right? So, and imagine there's the federal government or some other funding agency going to give people money to try to answer questions. They want to give money to people that are passionate about their work, and they want to be able to quickly look at it and go, okay, this 30 or 40 pages of grant material is something that seems to be of interest that this person is passionate about, so I'm going to continue to read the other 29 pages. Right? If that doesn't stand out in your writing, it gets hard to get those grants. It gets hard to get something published. If the person that's editing, the person that selects, and we can have all sorts of conversations about that, the person that selects the work doesn't like what the work sounds like in the first 30 seconds of their reading, they might slide it to the side. If you're at a wonderful seminar and you're standing in front of your poster and you're giving your little pitch about your poster and it doesn't seem very interesting, people might walk off. And the person that walked off might have been the perfect place for you to do your postdoctoral work or your graduate school application. That would have been the perfect lab for you to go to. But they walked off before they saw that you were really passionate about that work. So there's lots of other places where you really step back that learning how to concisely share your interest and your passion with another person is really, really useful. A few reasons for why you want to use an elevator pitch. We've kind of hit on the memorable impressions, right? The low energy pitch versus the high energy pitch, or maybe the pitch that has a lot of texture and a lot of richness versus the pitch that just kind of feels like you did a Google search for an elevator pitch and this is what popped out, right? Those things. It's good to know your pitch helps another person fit you within a field. Biology. Okay. What people know that this is supposed to be a grant that's designed for biomedical research. Do you know how many fields fall under biomedical research? On a bad day, I can't get everything in. On a good day, I can almost work my way around to including everything from art to zoology under biomedical research. What are the psychological and social implications of how artwork affects the community? Right? So we're very, very broad, multidisciplinary fields. And so being able to explain to somebody what your research interests are and how they fit within these very broad fields helps in a lot of different areas. It helps them understand your perspective, how their research might connect to your research, how somebody they know, how their research might connect to your research. It helps developing those networking options. Right? Because there's been a number of times where I've seen somebody tell another person what they do, and the response from that other person is, oh, you should meet this person over here. Because they're in our college and they do really similar work. Like, come on, let's go talk to them. Right? It helps to establish those collaborations that end up being really critical in pushing a lot of questions forward. And of course, open the door to future opportunities, things like that. Again, that fits in with that networking component. You should have in front of you those little sheets of paper. These guys. I'm going to recommend adding these 4 pieces to that sheet of paper. Because this has some very good information. And I think these 4 questions are also useful. Right, so if I step back to that elevator pitch that I gave you right at the beginning, right? What's the topic of your research? Now, mine wasn't really research-based. It was more of my personal background-based elevator pitch. But essentially it was on science education and making sure science is accessible to a wide number of diverse populations so that more people will feel safe entering this great field of ours of research. What's the problem, issue, or question that you are asking and addressing with your research? For me, my problem was that kids get scared off by that word science, and that leads to adults that are scared off by that word science, and they shouldn't be scared off by that word science. Like that was my problem. Why is that problem interesting and important? Well, because if we don't have young budding scientists, how are we going to keep moving forward as a things like continue to reproduce at a pretty high rate and consume resources. I don't know. There's all sorts of ways where having more science in your life is not bad. I also like to think of this so what question in a couple of different ways. There's the so what, why is it important to you? There's the so what, why should I keep listening to you if I'm the person that's walking up to talk to you? If you're the audience, why should I keep listening to your elevator pitch? That's where the passion part comes in, the authenticity, like finding that faith, right? What is it that made you see build EXITO and click the link and then click another link and then click another link and then start typing the information and then look up 4 hours later and realize you were still typing? What drove you, right, to make that step? What was it that you saw that said, hey, this program might let me answer a question that I think is really important? For some people, it's, I just love science in general, and maybe this program will help me figure out where I should go with that love of science. Right? Think about those things in that so what. The other thing is the so what. One of the things that sometimes worries me about the so what part is sometimes it becomes, well, so when you answer this question, what is it going to tell you? And there are certain areas of science, especially in basic research, where you don't really know what it's going to tell you. Like you don't know what the long-term applications are, so sometimes you're just asking that question because it hasn't been answered yet, and you don't necessarily have the strongest of the so whats. In other cases, you have a great so what. I remember as a young yeast researcher, we wanted to know why yeast budding patterns were the way that they were. How did they know where they were? How did they grow in the right direction so that they could make and fuse and help? I'll use a little bit of that for some elevator pitch work later. But, well, how do you care about that? Oh, well, it turns out that if you look at human development, neurons start off in a little pinprick, and somewhere those extensions need to get from point A to point B. C, D, E. They send out projections, just like the yeast that sends out its little projections. There is a so what. Right? So sometimes those so whats can be a little tricky to identify. And for me in my yeast lab, I'm probably not going to go grab a brain and play out some neurons. So the things that I find from doing my yeast studies, it might be 30 years before somebody takes them and applies them effectively in a clinical situation. It doesn't mean that I don't have a valid so what, it just means my so what might be a little bit different. The other thing that the so what impacts is you want to make sure that when you have somebody that's thinking about giving you a big pot of money, they have a good reason for why they should give you a big pot of money. So the so what kind of plays a role there. And of course, there's always that broader discipline. How does this fit into the grand scheme of things? Okay. Here's 3 more helpful pieces. You can write them down if you want. As we get towards the end, I'll try to leave this slide up so that people can kind of see these 3 pieces. You always want to make sure people know what it is you're working on, because I would say that it's kind of obvious. Make sure you name the topic. And of course, what is it that you really want to focus on? We'll talk in a slide or 2 about things that are broad, things that are narrow, how to kind of manage that, because sometimes you run into an elevator pitch that is literally everything. It's hard to fit everything into an individual field of discipline, because it's everything. And then sometimes people can be very, very specific. And if you say something in your pitch that is very, very specific, then other people might not be able to connect it just because they're not familiar enough with the work to be able to figure out how it fits into a discipline. So there's some things there. And then of course you always want to answer that so what question. Did everybody get those 4 questions I wrote on that previous slide? Okay, I forgot to stop and ask. This slide is kind of my favorite slide, because to be honest, I would say that in this room, what you're going to do over the next 4 days is going to put you, I like myself. don't think I knew about what an elevator pitch was until maybe my second or third year of graduate school. I mean, you don't really, like, you go to conferences, you don't really think about, oh, this is what I need to have. It's this elevator pitch. So it was never really formalized. We always did the practices and stuff, and, you know, kind of knew that these were kind of things you needed to be able to do, but to have an actual formalized concept of this is a thing that you should try to master, you're ahead of the curve. And then these three things are things that I've sort of learned in all of the bumpy patches that occur between when you start an education and when you think you have finished your education. Because you won't ever finish your education, you'll just keep learning more stuff. Someone told you that in life. You're going to keep learning things. Right? So, I remember as a graduate student going to a conference. And it was a conference that was paid for by another grant that I was on that required everybody that was on this grant had to present at this particular conference in Chicago. And the grant covered many, many disciplines. Sort of like EXITO, how we kind of cover a whole wide range of everybody from psychology, social sciences, chemistry, engineering. Like, we get a pretty broad range of people. So I'm in a lab and we do yeast research. And someone comes up to my poster, and I basically started in my elevator pitch. My name's Tory Blackwell. I'm from the University of Illinois in Chicago. In our lab, we study SRBCA budding yeast. I'm interested in the mating pathway. Specifically, I'm interested in how the G protein coupled receptors that activate the Q-spleen MAP kinase affect localization of Q-spleen MAP kinase, because prior to stimulation by pheromone, MAP kinase is essentially found all over the cell and a little bit concentrated in the nucleus, but after exposure to pheromone, it concentrates at the bud tip or at the shmoo tip and starts to concentrate inside the nucleus. How does that localization occur? What post-translational modifications take place that result in it localizing in that very specific region? Is it tethered there? Is it tagged and transported there? Why does it stay there? What proteins get activated by this kinase? And I remember about the third or fourth person that came up to my poster and looking at me and going, "So pheromones." Yes? And they said, "Oh, so is that like when I get that perfume from Macy's and I spray it on and it'll like attract guys because it's got the extra pheromone thing?" And I'm like, "No, not really." And for 10 minutes, I had this really uncomfortable conversation about mammals and pheromones, and specifically humans and pheromones. And I'm a yeast researcher. And then they wanted to get into like behavior and how that is impacted by pheromones and chemical signals. And I'm like, yeast. Right? Because I didn't know that my pitch was supposed to change because of the audience. So I started to learn that this is actually something to think about. So if I was at a yeast conference, I would give you that pitch that I just gave. If I was at a more general conference, I would dumb things down a little bit. And I would talk about there's basically two sexes of yeast, and they both have ways to send signals to one another. I look at what happens after those signals get received. There's some funny changes in where proteins end up. That's what I look at. I had that version. Many of you, we'll just ask now, how many of you ever plan on maybe going home? You know, visiting home, visiting your friends, going back to your community? Oh, come on, people, you're not that. You can't be living in the lab yet. Right? All of you plan on at some point, like, visiting home and having regular dinner table conversations. Right? Don't live in that cave. Don't do that. Right? The first time I went home and talked to my dad and explained to him what I did was essentially a little elevator pitch. I didn't have to introduce myself because he knew who I was. But I was like, "Dad, yeah, I got into the cell developmental biology program at UIC. I'm working in the yeast lab, looking at, single transduction pathways. It's really cool." And he looked at me and he goes, "Cells." Yeah. Those are small So you study really small things. Yeah. And that was pretty much it. But at least I knew what level I could talk with my dad. And when I would talk to my friends, I figured out that the only way that I could get one of my friends from high school to hang around me at a party or at a social event for more than 30 seconds was if I converted it into me watching geese have sex on a camera. Because that's essentially what I was doing with geese. There's basically essentially a male and a female, alpha and A type geese. And they mate, fuse, swap up some genes, make new offspring that have slightly different genes, because hopefully that'll weather out the storm, natural selection, evolution, all that kind of stuff, right? So I figured out if I told them that story of fuse 3 NAT kinases, they wandered off. But if I told them that, I sit in the lab for 7 hours a day under a microscope, I watch yeast try to find each other and have sex and make new babies, they're like, that's weird. I know. And then I have this protein that glows so I can watch where it goes. You watch glow in the dark proteins in the lab? Yes, that's what I do. That's cool, right? So they could kind of feel that. And then when I would go to all my little outreach, my little kindergartners and first graders and second graders, I would be like, okay, guys, how many of you like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches? We love PBJ. All right, and how do you make a PBJ? You get some bread and some peanut butter and some jelly. Right, bread. You know what's in bread? No, what's in bread? Yeast. You can use yeast to make bread, but they're little tiny things. You can't see it. They don't walk around. They don't talk. They don't have arms. They don't have legs. Really? There's things that have that? Oh, yeah. Most of the world you can't see looks like that. Right? But they really like to play with each other. What do you guys do when you want to play with each other? Oh, we go run in the playground and we find things and we go and we play tag. Exactly. Yeast want to play tag too. But they can't walk. So they have to know, is the guy that wants to play tag with me, is he close to me, or is he far away? If he's close to me, then let's play tag. We can play crow and each other. If you're far away, I can never reach you. I should never play tag. Because it turns out playing tag takes a lot of energy, right? Yeah, we get so tired. And that's what I do in my lab. I learn how to play tag. And so the kindergartners can kind of understand what I'm doing. So being able to break it down based on your audience is really, really useful, right? And especially because I'm hoping you guys attend lots of different conferences with lots of different focuses. And so you're going to want to be able to change that pitch to match the type of audience you're dealing with. Science is not stagnant, I hope. When it is, that's bad. Because the whole purpose, I like to remind people, science isn't really the process of generating information. The information is kind of a side effect. Really, it's the process of asking lots of questions. And once you answer a question, what you usually find is there's another question right behind it. I guess in a weird, sick sort of way, you have instant job security. Right? Because there's always another question. Now, is it the same question? Probably not. So as a result, the pitch changes. Sometimes students, you always visualize all of these great people in science. They just started here and they just went right to the top. They just follow this one linear path. Most of us, you sit down with us, and if you buy us coffee, we'll tell you more. That our paths kind of go like this. We start out with this thing, and then we answer a few questions, and we go, wow, that was really cool. And I didn't think about this over here. And they go over here, and they answer some more questions, and it brings them over here, and they go this way. So those questions change, adding more pitches to it. Right? Because in 20 years, you'll now have a 25-minute pitch. So you will learn that, okay, I was doing this, I'm going to keep this one bit of my pitch, because that was kind of the nucleus for where I'm trying to go. And now I'm going to tack on this other piece. And now that I've answered this question, I'm kind of going this way, I'm going to drop this piece off, take this piece and this piece, tack on this other piece. And here's my new pitch. And your pitch will probably change over time. Don't worry about that. This is probably the piece that scares most people at this stage that are in this room. I remember yesterday, I was at a table talking with some students about elevator pitches, and they told me that they had already made a pact not to talk about elevator pitches until Sunday, because they were all afraid having to give an elevator pitch. And I was like, okay, well, for one, unfortunately, you're at the table with the person that's going to lead the session Thursday on elevator pitches. So now I'm going to make you talk about elevator pitches because you don't want to. One. And two, it's just like everything else that you've ever learned. Right? Everybody that's in education, we know these things. Sometimes students don't like to admit it. But learning things, when you're learning things, you will be uncomfortable. If you weren't uncomfortable, then that would mean that you probably already mastered that skill. And if you've mastered that skill, I might question why you're in that particular classroom. Right? But when it's uncomfortable, that means it's uncomfortable because it's something new, it's something different, it's something you have to think about differently, it's something you have to maybe try in different ways, a little bit harder maybe to get through. But that's why it feels unnatural. What I think you will find is that over time, because you get to do this a bunch of different times and you'll keep doing it throughout your scientific careers and research careers and life in general, let me tell you, if you introduce yourself to me and it takes 20 minutes, I'm done. I don't want to be your friend. 20-minute introduction. You're going to suck 3 days out of my life every time you call me on the phone. Right? So it's just a good skill to have in general, and as you practice and kind of use some of the strategies that we've had and that you have on those sheets for developing that pitch, you'll be able to do it completely naturally on the fly without having to put nearly as much thought into it as you'll probably spend the next, 4 days. So this is 4 days thinking about it. The pitch that I gave you at the start, it was just what was bouncing around in my head. Like me in education is how I got it done. I didn't have to really spend 30 minutes crafting that pitch, and it felt kind of okay. When I do the 2:30 session, it'll feel different. I'll probably change some things up, but it'll have the same main components. The pitches that I gave you about my yeast, I haven't been in the yeast lab since like 2007, but I still remember most of the main components, so I can still give you that pitch. And I still love having done that work, so I still have that passion for that work. So those things kind of always stay, and it becomes really easy for you to just on the fly decide, okay, here's my audience, here's what they're interested in, here are some things that I think from my background, experience, research would make for a good pitch at this particular moment right now. Bam. Here's what I want to tell you over the next couple of minutes. Now, here are some key parts that can be kind of tricky at this early stage. First is identifying your research interest. Like I said, some people already know exactly what they want to be doing. Some people, it's still kind of broad, it's still maybe a little nebulous. You don't exactly know specifically what you want to do. That's okay. The main thing that I generally recommend people try to identify, if you don't know that specific research interest, and even if you do know that specific research interest, is what is it that makes it important to you? Right? What's that authentic piece that's in your mind, in your heart, that is driving you to want to answer a particular question? It can be easier for people that are maybe have that community focus because you have a very specific, maybe a problem that you've dealt with in your community or that you've seen in your community, and that is the worst, dumbest problem ever. I don't know why we haven't solved it, and since nobody wants to know, I want to know. So this is the question I want to ask, because why is it that everybody I know in my neighborhood has this problem, and nobody seems to care except for me, right? If you have that, that's great. If you don't, but there's some other piece that makes it authentic for you, then I recommend including that as part of your elevator pitch. Now, one thing that I will say, we often have students that give their elevator pitches and they have things like the speaker that we had on Monday that talked about her mental disorder, her bipolar disorder, right? That is a key thing in her research. She is passionate about that, and she has no trouble expressing her background and her experience as part of that elevator pitch, as part of her presentation. And if you can do that, that is great. If that is what drove you to click clicking on all those links and filling out applications and coming here today, and you want to talk about that, that is great. If you are not in a position where you feel comfortable talking about that, don't feel like you need to disclose that information. I mean, it's great if you want to and you feel comfortable, but don't feel required. Right? We like to have students included because it does tend to bring out their passion, because it usually is that authentic piece. But again, I don't want somebody that maybe doesn't feel comfortable sharing that now feeling like they've been forced to share that in order to show that passion and authenticity. So if you can do it, that's great. Don't feel like you are responsible. Have to do that. Okay? Broaden the view, narrow the focus. It's really looking at the elevator pitch from two directions. Some people come in and they have that broad, like, I just love science. And if I could find a way that would let me answer some questions that are science-based, that would be great, and that's why I joined EXITO. It could be a little vague, and when you're trying to figure out, like, well, what, I don't know who to hook you up with. Like, who do I network with when you want to know about everything? So sometimes people have to kind of sit down and go, okay, these are maybe the 4 things that I am kind of digging on. And if you really just say I can only pick one, I think I would pick this one thing. So I'm going to work from this one thing. Other people have really very narrow detail. Like, this is exactly what I want to do. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes it can make it hard for the audience. Right? Because remember, you got to make that connection with the other people. And if I jumped in front of you right now and said, I want to take the fuse 3 map class and make 17 different mutations to it and modify all phosphorylated to be phosphorylated and modify on active side and see what happens, you'd be like, I don't even know what the heck this guy's talking about. I don't know how to connect that because it's so focused. So sometimes you have to pull back and talk about, here's the bigger picture and what I have going on, and then specifically, this is kind of some things that I want to focus on as part of my research. Another way that if you're in that kind of identifying your research interest area, sometimes it helps to ask yourself the question, if you could answer any question or if you could work on any project, what would that project be? So I kind of related to when I was a kid, there were always like little toy cars, and then you play with all these toy cars, and then somebody would ask me, like, well, what car do you want to have when you grow up? And I would be like, I want a Lamborghini Countach, because look, it's so cool, and it goes 212 miles an hour. And when you answer that question as a kid, you are the most passionate 6-year-old ever. Because somebody just said, like, well, if you could have anything in the world, what would you be? Right? So you might be able to take that approach too. You know, if you could study, if you could answer any question, just any question, what would it be and why? Oh, I would love to answer this question. Here's all the reasons why. Right? Then you don't pull in as much baggage because you might also have that lingering, like, well, I can't answer that question. I can't answer that question. That question is tough. Take all that stuff away. Strip all that stuff out. Right? And just let yourself go. Let your brain run. It's okay. This is like the safest spot for doing that. For 2 reasons. One, you're going to be interacting with faculty that volunteer to do this work. Right? You're interacting with faculty that specifically are a part of Build EXITO because they want to see students get better. We want to help those students learn these skills that are essential skills so that they can go out, get the 4-year degrees and the advanced degrees, so they can go and do the research, and hopefully not so fast that they replace us too quickly. I need to go like 25 more years so I can retire. So it's a cushion. I don't want to get forced out of the job too fast. So the faculty love to help. So you can always walk up to pretty much any of us and say, hey, this is the elevator pitch I'm kind of working on. What do you think? I don't really care. You're not from Clackamas. You're still in Build EXITO. I'll listen to your pitch. Don't call me tonight and listen to tell me your pitch. Because that's weird how you get my phone number. But I will gladly listen to your pitch. The faculty that are around will gladly listen to your pitch. Your peers, this is also a safe space because your peers are in the same exact situation. So they will gladly listen to your pitch because 1, you might help them with their pitch. And 2, something you say interest that lets them get a little bit better, use what you did, improve, right? So it's a really safe space. It's way, and my other favorite is that if you tell me your pitch, I'm not going to like kick you out of the conference or anything. I'm going to give you some feedback. Remember when I said I've given pitches and people have been like, right? That's an unsafe space to give a pitch when the result could be the grant you were hoping you might find a collaborator for, or that person just wandered off. Right? That's not a safe space. This is the safest space that you will probably ever find, like as far as number of people that can help you learn the skill. So take advantage of that, right? Do some research. I have seen people give really great pitches, like have really nice starting pitches. You know, I'm interested in suicide rates in indigenous people. Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah, that sounds great. And then I've seen another person give a similar pitch, and I'm interested in suicide rates in indigenous people because a 2015 study suggested that Native Americans in Arizona have a 20% suicide rate versus Native Americans in Alaska have a 45% suicide rate, and people in this particular region have a 75%, but because they took 15 or 20 minutes to just go and add some additional texture, detail, richness to that elevator pitch. Because then when you start thinking about, remember we had that so what pop up a couple of times. If you tell me you're interested in suicide rates, I'm going to be like, yeah, suicide's bad. We should get rid of that. If you tell me that you're interested in suicide rates in a population that has a super high percentage, like rate of suicide, whoa, no, that's really, really bad. Okay, yeah, and in fact, I know some people over here that maybe like might be able to help with that because, right, it helps with that so what component. It helps drive the interest. It'll probably help bring out your passion because when you start sharing all of this extra data that connects to your story and your research interest, it really brings a lot into that elevator pitch. And of course, I'm interested in suicide rate elevator pitch is about 5 seconds. You got about a minute. So, longer than 5 seconds. Right? Last thing, practice. It's just like anything else you've had to learn. Right? How many people, mastered Pythagorean theorem on the first try? Okay, good. Did you raise your hand? Oh. Like I was about to slip into some weird sci-fi movie. I didn't know. When I was 4, I solved. This is good. Right? You had to kind of practice it, right? You had to do it a few times, do it a few different ways, maybe go to sleep. Brain keeps firing. Wake up. I totally know why this didn't feel good coming out of my mouth because this piece needs to be ahead of this piece. Yes, I'm going to make that change today. Right? So you want to practice, and not just in your brain. In my brain, I am the love child of Hemingway and Wadsworth. In my mouth, I am neither of the two. Right? What's floating around in your brain, how that bounces around, all these wonderful pathways that spit out of your mouth can be totally different. And there's nothing like, on the very first time, saying it. And as you're saying it, your brain is going, that's not what you're supposed to say. And then you try to walk it back, and you go, and 30 seconds later, we're like, okay, well, that was great. So remember, you have that safe space. So, once you get it written out, feel free to bounce it off of people. Actually say what you plan on saying on Sunday between 2:30 and 4:30. That practice helps. The practice, once you get through the practice, it reduces the nervousness, because remember we got that balance between nervousness and passion. Right? If the nervousness is down, the passion pops up. So we want to try to get rid of as much nervousness as we can, so our passion will increase, and you'll feel a lot more comfortable sharing that elevator pitch. You'll have a lot more energy. It'll be a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Right? So those are things you want to keep in mind. So we have a couple of example elevator pitches that I'm going to play for you.
So back in the 1950s and 60s, the Russians launched the Sputnik satellite and Americans landed on the moon. Ever since then, we put hundreds of people and thousands of spacecraft into orbit on Earth. And unfortunately, very few of those have ever actually left the immediate regions around Earth and been found on the moon. What my research is trying to do is look at how can you more efficiently move around the solar system and do it for a whole lot less money than we're able to do it now. Take the Voyager spacecraft. Was launched 50 years ago, it just left the solar system. My research can cut that time down in half.
So you can hear there he had a question that he wanted to answer. He had a why, so what? Why did he need to try to solve this problem? What's the point? He had a little bit of information in there, the Voyager probe information, and how many things have actually left the planet. He had a little bit of research in there, nothing too overwhelming. None of these start with one key thing. You know what was missing? Yeah. I just imagine like Elon Musk or something watching this on the internet and like, oh, he would be a great candidate for SpaceX and I don't know who he is. Right? So that's why, your name and where you're at is kind of useful.
A couple of years ago, I listened to another event to tell a story about how his mother was money ago and we stopped. The dentist had thought he found this pretty normal and pretty common. How could anyone bring a mother who was trying to help her baby feel better? And what would be the problem with using young girl to come from a package with family? At the end of the dentist's story, he asked me if I could believe this mother was using young girl and baby, considering that the government had warned us that young girl was one of their biggest effects. My first thoughts were, what government warning? What does the effect? I had no idea about either of these. And after I read through the article, I realized that no one really knew very much about babies 10 years ago. That's why I decided to do my research. I'm learning more about babies 10 years ago. Now that I've 5 years over, I know a lot more about what types of parents are using to value their babies, why they use it, and different ways the government might be able to spread the message that baby young adult and not become.
So there we got it pretty well defined. Like that's probably more from, almost a community component, like mothers and children. Like how do you address this issue with young adults? Why does nobody know they're dangerous? Those questions. So it's a pretty good, so what component. The other thing I like to point out about that talk, did you notice that she had like a little sheet of paper that she was reading from? That's fine if you need that for our elevator pitches on Sunday. Some people need a little bit of some guide, either a couple bullet points or written out statement. The practice, though, helps because how many people have listened to people give PowerPoint presentations where they mostly read the slide to you, and it sounds like slow earthquakes, shallow chest flutter. How does communication training benefit science? Right? There's not a lot of energy. So you want to make sure that you can still get that energy and excitement for the work, even though you're reading off of a sheet of paper. But don't feel like you have to have this completely memorized bit. You may need a little bit of a push there. It's okay to understand.
Do you remember the 2011 Japan earthquake from the news? In only minutes, the earthquake resulted in over 10,000 deaths, over 100,000 left, buildings, and a huge tsunami. An earthquake like that is truly a force of nature, and up here on the West Coast, we're at risk of an earthquake just like it. How will metropolitan centers like Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver fare? It's hard to know because we haven't had a big earthquake like that in over 300 years. And while we know that one was big, we don't know the intensity and extent of shaking. Scientists like me are trying to figure it out. Luckily, there's a type of slower earthquake. You can't feel them, but they occur frequently. In fact, one might be happening right now. Studying these slow earthquakes has the potential to help us determine the size of the next big earthquake, allowing scientists, engineers, and policymakers to make appropriate measures for the
The one thing that I kind of like about that elevator pitch is you can kind of see a spot where it was a big thing and it confines of an elevator pitch. So, we've had a few examples of elevator pitches. That's why this was available for us. Okay. I want to open the floor for a couple minutes for questions. Do people have questions related to the elevator pitch?
What do we expect on Sunday?
What should you expect on Sunday?
What ask us?
So we're going to get 75. No. What will happen is from 2:30 to 4:30, we're going to have each student present to the room their elevator pitch. We want it to be basically no longer than a minute because it's a 2-hour block. We've got about 90 students, so 90 times a minute is an hour and 30 minutes. Then you also have the transition time from student to student, so we usually lose a few seconds there. So you can kind of stay around a minute or so with the elevator pitch. That's what we're looking for as our final product. Between now and then, what I generally encourage students to do is when we have those 10 or 15 minute breaks between sessions, or when we have like a long lunch break, throw your elevator pitch at somebody, or maybe take 5 minutes and, how many people have smartphones? It's okay, you don't have to. A lot of people have smartphones. Take 5 minutes and do a quick, Google search and see if there's some other quick paper abstract you can read that maybe will help inform your elevator pitch, so that you can make it a little bit more richer and add a little bit of extra detail. Use those breaks for that. You can work with your faculty if they're around. You can ask them to listen to your elevator pitch and see if they have any suggestions or ideas, or other classmates, other students. And then right before the elevator pitch, we'll have about an hour and a half, I think, to refine and kind of finalize that elevator pitch. But I wouldn't wait until then to really start doing work on the elevator pitch. Right? If you don't do anything for the rest of the day today, Friday, Saturday, what tends to happen is you put together something on Sunday and you don't really feel comfortable with it, and then 1 hour later, you basically have to present this thing you don't feel comfortable with. So, and you'll be surprised what will happen when you write your first version of a pitch and then go to sleep. You wake up in the morning and then usually you go, oh yeah, why did I leave that out? Oh. Or yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't really like how that sounds. Start changing things. Other questions? Yes, the specific topic is what makes you interested? What research question do you want to answer? We don't have a set topic to work from because you guys are so broad. Biomedical research, like I said, is everything. Raise your hand if you are a, social scientist. Interested in social science. A couple of people, okay, raise your hand if you're a biologist. Okay, health sciences, nursing, medical, okay, chemistry, physics, engineering, right? Like the hands just keep changing, right? And that means that everybody's going to have a different, probably, question that they want to ask. But the cool part, and this is why a lot of us love the Sunday evening or afternoon session, is you will find there's going to be a biologist that has some question that links up with some ecology-driven person, that links up with some health science person, that links up with some chemist. And most of us just sit in the chairs and we go, oh, it would be such a cool collaboration if they work together. Yeah, they can do so much stuff because they've got all these different lenses that they're using to look at this question. Oh, that's going to be cool. We got to keep this cohort together, right? So it's okay to, be asking very different questions. That's fine. Really, the big thing is you want to pick the question that you really want to answer because it'll give you that passion for your work that we kind of want to hope shows up in your elevator pitch. Other questions?
Is there any more field studies that you want to do that or did you have that?
So what ended up happening for me is that I realized that the thread in my research track modifications to proteins and which proteins clump together to do what. So I ended up working in 3 different model organisms by the time it was up. Yeah, 3. I did some work in yeast, I did some work in mammalian tissue culture cell lines, and then I did some work in honeybees. And it was all related to how different proteins stick to different things. A lot of like protein, DNA, protein RNA interface type work. So I looked at RNA carrying protein, I looked at histones and DNA binding. They all have post-translational modifications, the tags that get added to them, that changes what things stick to them. But it took me, I remember the last elevator pitch that I gave to join the last lab that I was going to be, that I ended up being at, and I titled it A Series of Non Sequiturs. Because that's what it felt like, you know, when I just said, like, I work with you, it felt like that, but when I stepped back and thought about it, I said, oh yeah, no, what I'm looking at is like, where things go and why they fit together. Oh, yeah! Remember what I was saying? Like, I didn't have some of the elevator pitch stuff figured out until it was like 20 years later. Yeah. At least you're thinking about it now. Other questions? You could probably take one more before we move to our next activity.
How do you start? What's a good place to start at?
What's a good place to start at as far as the...
Like just how
Getting
you're
it out
gonna
of your
go
mouth?
about it, yeah.
Well, so obviously the best place to start is who you are and what you're interested in. I personally find it best to start from that idea of, you know, if I could do anything, what would I do? You know, if I was a superhero, any superhero, what can I be? If they were just going to give me all the money and all the research tools, what would I try to answer? And see if something pops up there. If you can't find something that way, sometimes it helps to go to the community component, because a lot of people kind of have that community connection. So those are usually the 2 good starting
Like,
points.
I have a specific question in mind, but I'm just wondering, do I want to explain my previous experience about it? What influenced me? Like, where do I go?
Oh yeah, I would say like your influence and your what led you to want to ask that question will probably be that authentic piece that'll bring out the passion